if someone says to you, cold calling and cold email doesn't work, what do you say to them?
When I say to them, you are the 7th person today at 25th this week. Basically, they say, hey, we do this. Can I have a half an hour of your time? What can I write to you so you at least reply with something positive? My guest today is Patrick. Patrick specializes in growing B2B companies and especially SaaS. Patrick, please introduce yourself and tell us in a few words what you've been working on recently and what you do.
Sure. Thanks, Pete. So yes, Patrick Thorp. For the last 8 years, I've been working as a fractional chief revenue officer. Fractional is basically a fancy way of saying consultant. So I typically consult with venture-backed or investor-backed businesses, predominantly SaaS businesses, but there's a decent peppering of service-based businesses in there as well. But the thing that stitches them all together is that they are typically a founder-led sales operation, and they want to move to a team-led sales operation. So with everything that goes with that, with the people, with the process, with the tech, all those kind of things, I've been doing that for the last 8 years. And that last count is about 15 different businesses, really sort of heavy on the implementation as opposed to just the oversight for the strategy, really. It's pretty good knowledge in this sort of space.
Awesome. Really impressive. Yeah, 15 businesses clearly specialize in this and growing companies and digital traffic, conversions, sales, how to link marketing and sales. So let's say someone approaches you, SaaS, they want to take it to the next level. What would be the very first steps that you would take to start growing a company?
Well, I'd firstly figure out how they got to the point they're at right now. What have they tried? How does it go on? Why did it go well? What have you tried? What hasn't gone well? Where do you want to get to? What makes you think you can get there? All those kind of diagnosis type questions, really, because I think one of the areas that people fall over is thinking that just because you've consulted lots of different businesses, what worked at one business will work at another. And so what I would need to get an understanding of is currently who's on the team and get an assessment of that. So the people side, understanding in terms of where do you currently get leads from? Why do people buy what you've got? Why are you winning? Why are you losing? And also, how are you utilizing available technology to not necessarily do the work for you, but what do you use? For the early stage businesses, it's going to be things like, well, do you have a CRM? Most people do, but some don't. How do you get in touch with people? What sort of channels have you found have worked well? So there's a lot of, that would be my first step. So assuming that conversation has happened, then it's really getting an understanding of where do you want to get to and where currently you are. So this idea of current and future state, which is, I can't take credit for that. That's something that's been around for ages in terms of sales. But I think it's really helpful to frame that, because then you get an understanding of not only where the founder wants to get to, but actually, are they being realistic? So I kind of give you an example. If they're at the sort of 500,000, 1 million annual recurring revenue, for example, and they say, well, we want to get to 10 million in the next 2 years, you might need to be a sense of, a bit a realist, because either that's not possible because of the market that they serve, or the average contract value that they're selling at means that you've got to sell a lot to a lot of people to get there. And you've got to assume that nobody leaves you as well. So that could be quite a big thing. But then equally, they said, well, we just want to get to 2 million, but instead of getting there in 3 years, we want to get there in 18 months. And you think, okay, well, that's a bit more of a realistic. And how do you think you're going to get there? I think it's probably one of the most powerful questions for a founder, because even though I've been doing this a long time and I value implementation over strategy by far, sometimes you have to remind them, look, I'm not a silver bullet. I just can't come in here and magically everything's going to start working all the time. Things will break that you don't want to break. We'll fix them. So it might be a bit of a plaster. But yeah, so it's that kind of emotional consultancy actually sometimes for founders, because you're dealing with somebody's business. So you've got to have that element of empathy with you.
I agree. And sometimes, from my experience, the founders don't know that what got them to 500,000, 1 million, the same system's not going to take them to 10 million, right? If they are the only salesperson in the company, you need 10 of them. If that one person sold to 1 million, right? They're going to need to have team 5x or 10 times bigger to get them to 10 million. You've mentioned the leads because this is always the big one, right? Where you find that company where is the source of leads? To that very first 500,000 to me, it's very often personal network. They need a couple of referrals, maybe someone that they've previously worked with in a previous company or through other connections. But then take that to the next level. What did you see recently that's been working? Is it ads? Is it outreach? Is it cold calling? Is it events? What is that good source? That number one that you would look for in general for companies to start looking at expansion?
So there's a couple of things. So I'll take a few. I'll sort of take three different examples, sort of outbound, inbound, and channel. So on the outbound side of things, now obviously you want to look at who's bought your stuff already, and are there any patterns? So is it that they're in a particular industry, in a particular region, a particular business size, problem set, things like that? That's easier said than done, because typically, as you said, you get your first few customers, it's almost like we're selling to anyone. So let's actually assume that there is no pattern. People have bought your stuff because you've spoken to them, they're a willing buyer. You don't really care, actually, at this stage, who's buying your stuff. What I would start to do straight away is I would start to look at how you could build at the account level businesses that look like those businesses. And there's some tech you can use for that. You could use Ocean, which is a lookalike. You could use Panda Match as well. You could also use Rightbound. So three kind of examples of technology which would help you go from, we've got some businesses that have bought us, into we've now got 200, 300, 500 accounts, let's say, very, very similar. So once you've built your account list, the thing that the founder absolutely needs to do is they need to go through each one of these companies line by line, have an understanding, knowing and being able to believe that if you were to speak to any employee of one of those companies, you would be excited to speak to them and you could help them. The reason I'm laboring that point is because very few founders actually do that bit, because it's a bit mind-numbing and it's a bit dull, because you are going through a spreadsheet line by line. But the time that you invest in doing that, which might take you a day, let's say, it shouldn't be outsourced ever. As a founder, you need to sit there in a room, focus time, busy work, whatever, in your Google Calendar, and do this exercise, because then you can start to populate those accounts with the relevant contacts. Ideally, you'd probably look between 3 to 5, something like that. Either way, you need to have the right people. And once you've got those relevant people there, a good trick is actually alphabetizing all of those job titles so you can then see, are there any that have crept in that aren't quite right? Because then what you're at, where you get to, is you get to the account level, then you've got the contacts. Now it's going to be understanding the best way of contacting these people. Now, to kind of give you an idea, you've typically got 3 different channels. You've got the phone, you've got social, you've got email. Now, quite a big thing that's shifted in the last year is this idea that try to prospect to that particular contact in the channel that they like being contacted via. So what I mean is taking all of those, well, let's say it's 500 accounts, 3 people per thing, 1,500 contacts. If you were to then score that data, you would be able to understand who picks up the phone, who didn't pick up the phone, but you've got the right phone number, so you're not quite sure if it's email or phone, and the other one who's just email only. Because what you can do then is you can take those 1,500 contacts, all of those who pick the phone up, they'll be in a phone only sequence. The ones who were phone and email, you need to get a signal off one of them, that would go into another sequence. Then you could get those who didn't pick the phone up, couldn't get an email, all that sort of stuff, or couldn't get a social, or whatever it might be, into an email only sequence. So what you're doing there is that you're trying to communicate with that particular prospect in their preferred channel. And that's been quite a big shift last year. And there's a particular software that I use called Titan, which does all that scoring for you really quickly. Now, that's very cool, because with startups, the thing that you want to be measuring for go-to-market effectiveness, especially for outbounds, is the amount of conversations that you've had and the amount of completed conversations. Now, again, that's not I can't take credit for thinking in that way. I didn't design a conversation first model. I adopted it because to me, every kind of business deal, if you go back to the source, is a conversation of some kind of description. So therefore, that's what you focus on. So for outbound, that would be what I sort of focus on. For inbounds, I would think it's more kind of content led. So it has to be kind of relevant, ungated, long form content. I personally think that's dependent on your buyer, obviously, but long form is usually of more interest. So not as much, but more detailed stuff. The thing that I don't really like, this is a personal opinion, is I don't like this idea of young sellers filming themselves, making cold calls in the idea of wanting to enhance their personal brand on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I personally don't think that that's a good use of time. I think this personal branding thing, whilst it does have its merits, 4 or 5 years ago, or the onset of when COVID started to happen, that sort of had a huge peak, and now it's sort of coming down. I just can't imagine when I started in sales close to 20 years ago doing that. But content-led to create inbounds, everything that goes with PPC and SEO, areas of digital marketing, to be honest, I don't really understand, but that can obviously help. And then channel. So when I talk about having a partnership strategy, those first two areas I talked about are direct sales, and channel is more indirect, so selling through people. So it's being able to understand those people where if they are to be selling your product, it helps them sell more of what they sell. Now, that's obviously, it takes a little bit of time to sort of get your head around, but what this does is it means that you're able to extend your workforce and reduce your cost of acquisition because somebody else is doing the sales for you. By way of example, working with a recent business I've been working with, Pushvar, who are a mentoring platform, having partnerships with different consultancy businesses in people development who saw that as part of their scope of work, they included a mentoring platform because that was this whole digital transformation piece they were doing with big customers. That was different. That helped them sell a greater scope, so therefore made more money on their professional services. And so you're wanting to try and mobilize 3 or 4 partners actually doing that and working together, as opposed to the myopic, actually, way of a partner strategy, which is getting someone to sign a partner agreement and go, oh, go and get us some business. Every time you get us some business, we'll pay you 10%. It's crap, and it doesn't work. And that's why partnerships don't work in businesses, because that's usually the focus, and it's wrong. So I think, those sort of 3 things. You've got the outbounds and the inbounds, very different channels, but both work on the direct side, and then you've got the channel with the indirect.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and I agree on especially partnerships, right? Building partnerships. So I'm going to go other way around with trying to build the partnerships. If you are lazy and going to say, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a cut, essentially just try to offload your sales to someone else and rely on their network or their experience, which isn't a good way. I've found a few companies with very good partnerships, and especially with digital innovation. For example, someone in construction building something for energy and digital transformation, the SaaS, having a product that's massively going to help them. And they were partnering with them to be able to offer for that end client another solution, right? And they were helping both parties massively, right? It's not like it's 10% for you. It's more of, we're going to make your life easier, and the end client, your client's going to have even better what you're building for them. Let's partner up on this. These really, really work, but there's a very niche down, very industry specific very often. Inbound here, especially with personal content, I find it that's a fantastic strategy. It needs to be executed right, and I'm actually going to slightly disagree with those people cold calling, because I think it really works for them. Because as for example, CEO, to see a person like this, every time I see them, the guy is on the phone, I can hear that conversation, for example, and they just want to have a piece of that person in the company, because I've seen cold calling being executed really badly. Usually they put a very junior person to do cold calling. It's executed really badly. and it doesn't work because there is an art to it now. Everyone is aware it's all on mobile, so unknown numbers. You need to be clever about how you're going to approach this. And I think the CEOs see that, and they want piece of that person, or at least that person to train their people, right? Because sometimes even a few hours of training can change how their team's going to be cold calling.
Yeah. So let me be clear on one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So what I was referring to was videos being uploaded to LinkedIn where I'm just going to pick on an account execs are filming themselves riding to work, filming themselves getting coffee, filming themselves, kind of fake laughing a discovery call. That's what I'm talking about.
Gotcha.
That's personal, that kind of inbound stuff, personal brand thing.
Yeah.
I think it's seeped in from Instagram.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's fine content. It's the wrong platform. That's what I was referring to.
I know. Okay, gotcha. Completely misunderstood. I thought because maybe I just clicked with the content I've been actually recently watching. Some people cold calling, but yeah, I agree. I mean, the audience must care about it because otherwise they're not going to have those followers, subscribers. I don't know if it creates business for them or is it just a bit of a vanity little project for them. But yeah, I think the newer generation, it's all about this, right? The Instagram is one part I don't like it. Everything is beautiful there. No one shares an average day, boring day, or bad day, right? Everyone is just happy on holiday. Weather is beautiful, right? And everything is just perfect. I think that probably is topic for another conversation. We didn't have this. I knew what my neighbor had, and there's a couple of people. I didn't constantly, as a younger person, maybe wasn't bombarded with everyone's on holiday, everyone's minted, everyone's car is more beautiful, and we never had that to compare ourselves as a 20-year-olds, right, or 18-year-olds, and now it's not a great thing. I am against. I'm not actually a user of any of those social platforms, but they must work for them, right? If they selling, I don't know, open your lead gen agency and look at me, I did that last year and now I'm made $1 million. It clearly works for them. Now, but the most important and interesting from our side is the outbound, because I talked to 100 businesses last year, and the number one, always the objection I hear is cold emails, cold calls. They don't work for us. I've heard it from every type of company and every position in the company, especially the ones that have tried it for a month badly. And they always say, it doesn't work for us. If our sales is a bit more complicated than an email, right? Talk me through your experiences through trying to sell or pitch outbounding for companies, going after their ICPs themselves on their terms.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. Just before, so if someone says to you, cold calling and cold email doesn't work, what do you say to them?
Because usually they make it about themselves, and they say, hey, we do this. Can I have a half an hour of your time? And I say to them, you are the 7th person today at 25th this week, right? Everyone is thinking about 30 minutes. You never really put any effort, just because it's mass emailing, into researching what can I write to you so you at least reply with something positive, right? To me. Because that's how the conversation starts. It's a conversation starter. You're not going to pitch your services and sell it. So either research the massive problem that your prospects has, or bring gifts. Say, hey, I've got something for you and I'm giving that to you because of this, right? Would that be something of interest? We've did strategies, for example, like giving free workshops. And the free workshops are done on a very particular subject that we researched that prospect most likely will be interested. And remember, with outbound at scale, we want 5% of those people saying, yeah, Patrick, I'm interested, because that's something that be on our mind. So at the second you're going to just reverse it and going to make it about your prospect, not about you, you've got higher chances of starting that conversation.
Okay. So it's not that the channel doesn't work, it's a scripting issue, what you just said.
Yeah.
So, okay, fine.
Channel works. When you think about, and especially the higher you go, if you go to CEOs of companies, if you go to C-level, this is the only channel that they actually spend any time on. They're not on Instagram, right? They're not on TikToks. They hardly ever on LinkedIn anyway, right? And even if they are, they're not scrolling there and reading some messages. The one thing that I guarantee that they are every single day is email, right? The reason they ignore your email is because there is just nothing there for them. So we're finding actually email is our favorite one, because with automations, we can do that at the bigger scale, right? With some AI personalization, we can have all of the personal touches. And then all we're thinking at is, what can I give you in that very first email? So you're going to be remotely interested in saying, yeah, I'm interested. And only then we're taking that conversation from there. It doesn't mean that we just sold whatever we wanted to sell to them. What we wanted to sell is, we wanted to sell half an hour conversation. That's all we want.
Okay. So I sort of derailed it there. Your question was, how would I go about selling kind of the calling as a channel, right? Well, so I'm yet to be convinced, delighted if I can be convinced that there is a better channel than the phone in terms of response rates. So at the moment, if LinkedIn is to be believed, 0.5% reply rate in email is celebrated as success, 0.5%. Whereas if you are on the telephone and you are anywhere between 10 to 15% of a booking rate, so the person that you speak to, the intended person, the intended account, and you book with that person, you've already not even 10x, but 20x the success. So I would suggest to anybody that if you're able to do that, then there's lots of dynamics there. There's the channel, there's the audience, there's the timing, which we can't control, the script, the message. Would you not want to have 10 to 15% booking rate than 0.5? So that would be my first thing. So it's almost like empirically, look, how does that look? And so that would be the first thing. The second thing, though, which we'll always come back to, is going to be the data source. Now, the world of B2B data, or the market of B2B data, you got a few behemoths in there. From my experience, the providers are all good and they're all crap at the same time. What I mean is that every single one of them has holes. And that's not a slight on them. It's just that's the fact of the matter is. And so actually, some people say, well, why don't we have subscriptions to each one? And you think because your cost base will suddenly explode. So it's not really there. So there are different ways around that, and actually having a waterfall type strategy for your data sourcing and having a real good understanding of your replenishment rate. So what I mean is, if you have X number of conversations per week, per month, per rep, whatever it might be, what factor do you need to times that by of new leads coming into the hopper?
Yeah.
Already what I'm starting to do is starting to build a little bit of a picture on the engine that is required to do effective outbounds, and the marshalling of that, because you've got the data piece in there, that being constant, basically the petrol that's constantly going in. Then you're having the reps actually doing the work. And I think one of the big trends in 2025, or the people that are going to win, are those reps who embrace doing fear-based work, i.e. having the conversations and being not afraid to then follow up with that person. And I think therefore having somebody responsible for the sourcing of the data and having that all pulled through, reps being hired to be conversationalists as opposed to list builders, researchers, things like that. Hire them to be a conversationalist, and then being able to curate your market into people who are buying now, which is, if the Chet Holmes buyer pyramid is to be to believe, the 3%. You've also got 30% who never going to be interested in what you're selling. You've then got 67% left over who are in varying degrees of not interested, don't think I'd be interested, not interested right now, all that sort of stuff. That's the bit that the outbound strategy needs to curate and take a sieve to, or a colander to. So having an understanding of that starts to build quite a nice picture. And then I often hit founders with something that's a little bit, again, dose of realism, by saying, you will get revenue from outbound initiatives. It will take you quite a long time to get dense revenue from outbound. And quite a long time could be 12 to 18 to 24 months to get dense revenue. I'm talking about to start to get signals on how things are working, messaging and things like that. Start to build pipeline would take probably about 120 days if you're doing it right. So even that's 4 months. Right. So it's quite a big conversation, the outbound side of things, because there's lots of moving parts. But when you get it right, you're now a business that has gotten to a certain level with inbound, probably solely relying on inbounds. There's a ceiling to that. You have to go out and tell people who don't know about your product or service, figure out where they are, and if it even makes sense to have a conversation at some point. As equally important, if they know they're never going to be relevant to you, get rid of them and don't talk to them again. But all this process takes quite a long time, unless you say, we're never going to do direct sales and our whole process is going to be via the channel, which is exactly what Atlassian did. That's how they grew so fast. They did no direct sales. They sold all through their partners, and only in the last year or so have they recruited about 40 or 50 direct sellers. And they're at about, I don't know what their market cap is or what their revenues are, but I think over 9 figures now. They're a lot later to the game, but even they say, look, we need outbounds. So we're going to hire lots and lots of people to do specific outbounds. So yeah, big conversation to have, the outbound one.
Yeah, but it shows you essentially one thing. You're going to make any of those channels work if you're just going to really focus on this, right? Because there are companies just doing it with outbound. There are some with just organic content. The other ones are doing with just Instagram ads. And even maybe the product on the surface doesn't look like you can sell through Instagram. Someone does it with cold calling, someone does it on LinkedIn, and someone else can do it with just partners and finding a channel. And if they're just going to focus like, I'm going to succeed at this within the year, and it's going to be robust and very good, sales channel, you're going to make it work. I think the problem that a lot of companies have, they try a little bit, they try 4 weeks of each. And then they come at the end of, 12 weeks and say, nothing works. And basically, then is a conversation, the market is different, interest rate is high, and this and that. And it's like, well, there are companies that just succeed at that one channel that you've tried for 4 weeks. The difference is they went all in for a year, right? And they actually succeed on this. Okay, now we've got this lead and we've got something worked. What do you think is the big mistake in sales process the companies do in B2B? Is that something that really stands out for you as in a sales process? I'm a big fan, for example, of the gap selling. You've mentioned that now state, desired state. And if you can only just find that gap that I can help you close, right? I like the approach of selling what we call a land and expand. Just find even just small thing I can get you closer to closing this gap. It really opens up then account-based marketing, right? Because if you sign them, over-deliver on that one thing, just so much easier to keep, selling the same company for the years to come. Is there something that you identified as the big mistake that B2B companies do in their sales process?
I think it labeling one stage in your sales process as discovery, and not believing that discovery is something you do across all stages. So typically what I've seen is, and this is no, this is no slight against founders or people who do this, but stage 1, for example, of your sales pipeline could be called discovery. And then you might have second stage being proposal, then contracts, then close one, whatever it might be, as simple as that. What that reinforces is that the discovery is something that you do once, because then when you're in stage 2, you've done all your discovery, you don't need to do anything. And I think by having the taxonomy of your stages labeled as such, it reinforces the wrong behavior. Whereas if you were to have, for example, stage 1 being sales qualified deal, and that being qualified because you know why they're going to pick us, why they're changing, and why they're changing now, for example, and then your stage 2 being a team call, a deep dive, then a proposal, then a contract, the activities you do across all of those stages are going to be discovery. And that's when you can then utilize a sales methodology, whichever one you want to use. There's loads of them, right? And depending on what type of thing you're using, you might be a medic shop, you could be MedPick if you want to be a little bit more elaborative. You could use Spiced, which I like. You could use Bant if you want. I mean, was created in the 60s, so it's a bit old now. But having some sort of methodology helps. And I think the final point on this is just following the process is not looking to kind of cut corners. So, for example, you might get an inbound inquiry. It's more likely to be inbound with this example, which is we're looking to move on something. We'd really like to kind of get a proposal from you and pricing and things like that. Jumping on that and thinking, okay, great, let's have a quick call, 5 minutes of questions, and then I'll sort of create you a proposal. and then wondering why you never hear from that person again, or they come back to you to say, we decided to go a different way. So because you cut a load of corners, because you haven't figured out, actually, you're just trying to gather a quote in to then play me off against somebody else. So thanks, but no thanks. That challenge is solved by having a pipeline, because then you wouldn't entertain conversations like that. Because look, I don't need this. I've got other things that are properly qualified. This doesn't, and you wouldn't waste time with it. So I think, just thinking of discovery as a static part, as opposed to a fluid concept, and then trying to cut corners, I think, in the process.
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially thinking about discovery as this is 30 minutes and I know everything I need to know. Well, I'll give you a great example. I've managed to, it was last year, talk to 2 VPs of a company that we were trying to talk to. On a cold email, both of them told me that cold email doesn't work for them. Both of them were VPs of in sales and growth of some sort, I think marketing and sales, or sales and revenue, something like this. And I did an hour of discovery with each of them, and the discovery was completely different, right? I could tell after speaking the first one, I know everything. But when I spoke to the other one, his problems were completely different. Never mentioned anything that the other guy did. So he actually gave me a real life example of the discovery never finishes. From the very first conversation, you build a relationship. So they, ghosted after proposal because you've got a relationship, and it's constant discovery. Even when you pitch your proposal, that's still discovery, right? Because pitch should be, in my opinion, a conversation. It's not, I'm just showing, because otherwise we'll be showing a PDF or we'll be sending a pre-recorded things. There is a reason why we connect. This is still discovery. If you're going to have objections, we can discuss them right there. And I can, doing it this way, I can change a few things on the spot or reconnect with you tomorrow. So I think, this is exactly why I've got similar observations. Just focusing on this, it is a relationship from the very start. And, doesn't matter if you sell something for 5K or 150K, right? The process is exactly the same. And then going to the second point, pipeline. Number one thing, that should be the pipeline, strong pipeline. It's going to resolve majority of your problems, right? Because the worst thing is just having 3 people. And if something falls through, it's like, oh, I'm back to square one. But if you just constantly build on prospecting, doesn't matter how you do it, inbound, outbound, partners, right? You go to businesses locally yourself. It doesn't matter. Just make sure there is always loads of people at different stages, because then the life becomes a little bit easier for that growth. You've got always some, you never know who closes and when, but when you have strong pipeline, you just can predict with, probability that, okay, in March, we're going to be closing that much because we have 27 people, 20% we've historically been closing them. They're at different stages. In March, we may have 4 deals, right? So yeah, I think this is always fantastic just to keep working on that pipeline, keep trying new things, because the world is changing. Something that worked 3 years ago is not working anymore. COVID started a great way. We can do business online. Unheard of in 2018. You had to go and visit person and have those conversations like this. Now we can do it on Google Meet. And what is even better, from my opinion, for that discovery, a note taker, a simple one tool with one click. I have 100% retention of that conversation. What happened? What was important to you? What did we talk about, numbers, or how you did something, or who you tried, or some software they used? Or, when I go to those next conversations, 2-3 months later, I've got 100% of retention of what has been said, what you told me 2 months ago in that conversation, which I find extremely useful to be absolutely 100% prepared to all those conversations. It doesn't matter if they next week or 3 months later.
I think on the pipeline side of things, then yes, absolutely. You need to have the more prospecting that you do. But I think what's key for founders is you need to incentivize the right behaviors. And so if you're designing a commission plan, for example, that's obviously what you're trying to do. But what's worked very well for me in the past has been paying a spiff effectively for prospecting activity based on completed conversations. So, for example, not comping SDRs or AEs on the meetings booked, but actually comping them on the amount of completed conversations. So that could be a meeting booked. It could be that they've said no, not never. It could be a no, not now. It could be a no, not me. It could be like an activated one where it's like send me some info and follow up, things like that. And it might be, £10 per completion or something like that. And what that does is it reinforces that behavior. It also decouples the psychological impact some more junior people, if you put them in those roles, of getting somebody on the phone, then not getting a meeting and seeing that as a failure. It decouples that. So if you're incentivizing to drive the right behaviors, decoupling from meeting booked and saying meeting booked is just as valuable as somebody saying, no, I'm never going to be interested. Again, that creates an environment where there is success baked into this fear-based work that I talked about. And then finally, I think it's wrong. I think the SDR model, the SDR AE, the assembly line, has had its day, and I think it's old. It doesn't work. Put simply, my view, there are some businesses where it works, but there's too many pinch points. I think it's because the SDR profile has been wrongly developed to assume it's an entry-level position and you get promoted out of it. But pipeline building is the most important activity for a business to do, yet we'll put the most junior people in doing that activity. That makes absolutely no sense. And when you say it out loud, people sort of nod along. Well, actually, no, it doesn't make sense at all. So why would you want to run an SDR AE assembly line model in your go-to-market operation? It's brainless. So sometimes you've got to unwind stuff that's been occurring, that's not been occurring very well, and actually say, well, full cycle reps are just what you need to do, to be honest.
Absolutely. Yeah, very good observation. And especially that's very often the very first touch point with your prospect. You know, we may want to pitch them $500,000 contract this year. Your first touch point.
So on that, right, it's on that point, let's sort of explore that a bit. So let's say cybersecurity is selling to CISOs, CTOs, something like that. CISOs are arguably the hardest people to get hold of on the phone. You are 21, 22 years old. How on earth could you be expected to have a business conversation filled with domain expertise and knowledge and sort of acumen that you would need 15 plus years in the game? And that's the role that you're giving to an SDR to have. Whereas whilst we wouldn't conduct discovery necessarily on the telephone, you get some of those people on the phone, the conversationalists and the more experienced sellers could have that 15 or 20 minute conversation with them and have a bit more. Doesn't mean to say that those sellers are better in terms of ability than these SDRs. I'm purely commenting on their tenure with regards to their commercial experience. So again, why would you give that potential conversation that could happen to somebody who's maybe just graduated university? I don't get it.
Yeah, I totally agree. There is a space for an SDRs, especially maybe working a little bit in the background in someone's inbox. But it's not massively live conversation. Maybe you just reply, maybe have an okay from the person that you emailing or messaging on LinkedIn on behalf of. But there is definitely a lot that companies need to start thinking in a different way sometimes in sales. Sales should be number one priority, right? If you're going to do activities as a CEO of not a huge company, maybe not have that sales team just yet in the processes, because it's not about the team, it's team and process and system. Mm-hmm. You focus on sales and get those junior guys to do maybe something that is time consuming, but it may not mean $500,000 contract this year.
So I suppose that's the point that I want to make is that the SDR top of funnel role is absolutely critical. I'm not saying that it doesn't have a place. What I'm saying is that the profile of who occupies that seat. So you get some people who are fantastic at that piece. They're crap at closing deals, but they're brilliant at opening them. And you get the complete opposite as well. Hate prospecting, are absolutely hopeless. Very good kind of deal shapers.
Yeah.
And if you can kind of find those people, then you're on to, you could have a go-to-market operation that's incredibly lean, but actually the production of what it's able to do means that you've got the correct people in the correct seats at the right time, which I think is and that's one of the key points in, I think it's Jim Collins' book, From Good to Great. I think he talks about this bus analogy. People being on the right bus, the right seat, the right time, on the right bus stop so they get picked up at the right time, that kind of idea.
Yeah, awesome. Listen, if any of those our listeners here would like to contact you, where could they find you if they would like some help or consultation or even, assessment of their sales processes or prospecting or systems, how they go after the new clients? Where can they find you online?
Yeah, best place is LinkedIn really for me. So Patrick Thorp, and that's Thorp without an E on it. You'll find me there, pretty active on that particular profile, and we'll be able to sort of get something set up. But yeah, that's the best first port of call.
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Fantastic conversation. You clearly have got a ton of experience in growing and prospecting and selling and really assessing systems and processes and how you should be really organized and what priorities companies should have. Thank you very much for today. I really appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, Pete.